Good morning, everyone. We're just going to go ahead and give another minute to have some additional folks hop on, give people a chance to connect, and then we will get started. Welcome to our immigration briefing, and we'll go in just about 60 seconds.
Hi, Susan. This is Jorge Alorza. I'm still in the waiting room. You can have someone just bring me in.
Yep.
Here we go. Got it.
Ooh. Okay, welcome everybody. We are so glad you are all with us this morning to have a conversation and learn some things about immigration reform in our states. I am Susan Frederick. I'm with the National Conference of State Legislatures, and I'm joined by a very, very esteemed panel of mayors, commissioners from the counties, state legislators, and township members as well. So welcome everyone. I am going to announce that we will have questions and answers. Please put them in the chat box as you think of them as we go through. And I will go ahead and say that this briefing is being held on behalf of several of our organizations representing state and local elected officials of the National Conference of State Legislatures, the United States Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, and the National Association of Counties. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to Mayor Jorge Alorza from Providence, Rhode Island, to kick us off and lead us in our briefing.
Great, thank you, Susan, and thank you everybody for joining us today. So as Susan just mentioned, I am Mayor Jorge Alorza from Providence, Rhode Island. I am the co-chair of the United States Conference of Mayors Immigration Reform Task Force, and you'll meet the other co-chair, the mayor of Mesa, Arizona, John Giles, shortly. But I think it's really important to point out right from the very beginning that we co-chair the Immigration Reform Task Force. John is a Republican, I am a Democrat, and I think it's just it's really heartening to be part of an organization that in politics that still works in a bipartisan way. And so John is not only an ally in this work, but he's a great friend. So great to be on here with you. And as always, Mayor Giles. I also want to thank all the other organizations that are partnering with us today. And it's important that we make a point of addressing immigration reform today, and that we do it in a bipartisan fashion, because it truly is a bipartisan issue. Let me also welcome all of the congressional staff who are with us for this session. We'd like for you to hear about the immigration issues from our perspectives, from the local and state governments, and understand why it's so important to all of us that Congress and the administration work together to fix the broken immigration system that we have. I have to note that there has been progress on this front. So we're really excited that just yesterday, the House passed the DREAM and the Promise Act, and also the Farm Workers Modernization Act. So we're really excited about that. And especially after the past 4 years, it seems as though we've been on the defensive all the time. This is certainly an opening and an opportunity for us to actually work together and move forward on these issues. So I'm really excited about it, and I hope that the Senate is also going to act on these and other bills. So let me introduce all the folks that we have participating here today from various state and local governments. First, I want to recognize Commissioner Bill Truex. He's the chair from the Nato Immigration Reform Task Force, and he is from Charlotte County in Florida. So great to have you with us, Commissioner. I mentioned my partner, Mayor John Giles, the mayor of Mesa, Arizona, and the co-chair of USDM Immigration Reform Task Force. We're also so lucky to have with us Representative Sharon Tamiko Santos from Washington. She's a member and former co-chair of the NCSL Task Force on Immigration and the States. And last but not least, we're also joined by Trustee Sharmeen Shahjahan. She's from Hanover Park, Illinois, and she's the vice chair of the NLC Human Development Federal Advocacy Committee. So we're each going to share a bit of our perspective and how we come to these issues. I am mayor of Providence, but I'm also, and perhaps even more importantly, the children of immigrants who came here as undocumented about 45 years ago. And being raised in this household, I was born here in the United States, but I identify very closely with the immigrant cause, because those are my parents and that's my family all around. And I can tell you that even though I am an American citizen by virtue of having been born here, many of the challenges that undocumented immigrants face in this country, I face them as well. You see, my parents, without having proper documentation, they would be very shy and very, very anxious about signing up either myself or my sister for any kind of formal activities. I remember as a child asking my parents if I could join Little League, and that required an application. You had to give your name and where you lived. My parents were always concerned about doing things just like that. So there are a number of children who are themselves citizens, but their parents are not, and perhaps are here, are undocumented here in the United States, and they suffer the consequences of this as well. But it's certainly not limited to them. We in all of our cities and our counties and in our communities, we see that immigrants, whether documented or not, they're contributing in so many different ways, especially through the pandemic, where a large percentage of our essential industries were sustained and kept afloat by our immigrants who continue to come into work every day and provide those essential services, without which our experience and our quality of life would have been diminished even further. On top of that, we also know that there's a great deal of human potential that isn't fully flourishing because of inherent limitations that undocumented immigrants face. I can tell you here in our city, there's an entrepreneurial spirit. There is something about being an immigrant that makes you willing to take on risk and jump into the unknown and figure it out as you go. It's I think it's inherent to what makes you an immigrant to begin with. But with a lack of access to bank accounts, with a lack of access to capital, it's very difficult for these folks to launch their own businesses, or at least if they do launch their businesses, it's very difficult for them to scale up. And perhaps as the surest proof of the entrepreneurial spirit of our immigrant community, for those of you who have traveled internationally to a developing country, I think you've all experienced the same thing, that no sooner do you get off the plane and leave the airport, there was no shortage of people trying to sell you things. That is entrepreneurship at its heart, and it's something that immigrants bring with them to this country. There's so much further and so much more that we can grow as a society by fully integrating all of the undocumented immigrants and undefined status individuals throughout our society. So we are partners in this work, we are allies in this work, and we want to work with you to make sure that we can develop the full potential and capacity of all of our people and make sure everyone has a shot to live out the American dream. So with that, I will pass it over to my colleagues. So each of my state and local government colleagues is going to make a brief statement sharing their experience, and then we'll have a discussion on some of these key issues. Following that discussion, as you just heard, we're going to open it up to a Q&A with congressional staff. In the meantime, please put any questions in the chat and we'll get to as many of them as possible. First up, I'm going to ask Charlotte County Commissioner Bill Truex to share his experience. Please take it away, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I want to thank you for moderating this panel today. My name is Bill Truex, as you've heard. I'm the County Commissioner from Charlotte County, Florida. I am the current chairman of NACO's Immigration Reform Task Force, serving in the last of a 3-year opportunity that initially took on a little bit reluctantly and then dove in head first. I have almost 30 years in the construction industry, and I've about a decade in local county government. And I have a very high personal understanding of how vital immigrants are to our local economy and our national economy. The public health crisis and subsequent economic downturn has deeply impacted the availability of our local workforce. And I also presented challenges to keep our residents safe, especially to our migrant workers. So looking at those aspects, it's clear that immigration, or our current immigration landscape, is not only an economic issue, but it's a humanitarian issue. And this is something that I saw on the border when we did a border tour of El Paso firsthand with a single mom coming across from Honduras and also another one from Guatemala. And it's very interesting to have conversations with some of those folks, either on the El Paso side or in Juarez, where we got to experience and be educated by those that were traveling to this country looking for better opportunities. According to recent data, immigrants account for 24% of the construction workforce, and it's even higher in construction trades at 30%. However, in the recent years, we've seen a significant decline in the number of newly arrived migrant construction workers. And although we've highly favorable economic conditions, particularly in Florida, the change in our nation's immigration policies decreased the availability to our local workforces. Absent these valuable workers, existing labor shortages in the home building sector would be exacerbated, leading to project delays, increased costs for buyers, and slowed economic growth in our industry. You know, I've seen over the years, I have a concrete subcontractor that I've been using and have known him for a very long period of time, but he's been my pretty much sole source guy since 2003. About 60% of his workforce is from outside the United States. You don't find people wanting to come into the construction industry. In many ways, they're discouraged by family members. It can be discouraged sometimes within the school systems themselves. And, you know, we all know that not everybody aspires to become a college graduate. Either path can be acceptable, but what I would tell you is that these migrant workers outperformed our U.S. citizens on a daily basis. They learn quickly. They are very proud of their efforts. And so in that industry, for me, what I see, it's very important to have access to that workforce, which is so much needed at this point in time. I also know that I've had interaction in the previous 4 years about the role of folks coming here in other areas of the marketplace. The service industry, for example, the general manager of Caesar's Palace had conversation, and they can't find workers in Las Vegas, or they couldn't at the time. Obviously, things are a little bit different now, but they paid $19 an hour for their environmental services folks. They give them 2 meals a day and provide free health care, and they can't find workers. You talk about the Workforce Modernization Act, which we've been working on for a very long period of time. And luckily, there's going to make modifications, but a gentleman from Montana who is a county commissioner had to shut down his dairy farm because he couldn't find workers to keep it up and operating. It's very important also to point out that NACO has been supportive and wrote letters in support of both these recently passed bills. And I will tell you, it's a very proud moment, because without the Immigration Reform Task Force and our guiding principles, that would not have happened. I'm also proud to say that the National Association of Home Builders also wrote letters of support and made it a key vote for Congress. Finally, I think it's very important to understand from the humanitarian perspective how important it is for Congress to take a look at the definition of the family. You know, the nuclear family, we need to identify grandparents and aunts and uncles as caregivers in some cases, so that separation doesn't have to be taking place. So I would urge anybody that's on here from Congress to help us redefine those roles and expand that definition so that we don't have to have separation and anxiety to the levels that we've seen in the past. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Truex. I am John Giles. I'm the mayor of Mesa, Arizona, and I'm proud to co-chair the conference of Mayor's Immigration Reform Task Force with my good friend Jorge Lorza. Jorge, I just want to say thank you for sharing your family experience this morning. That was meaningful to me as your friend, but it was meaningful to all of us, I'm sure. As Jorge indicated, he and I are from different parties, but I assure you we are joined at the hip on immigration issues. let me tell you, I'm the mayor of Mesa, Arizona. That is the reason why I care about this issue. Mesa, Arizona is the 35th largest city in the United States, but we're in the top 25 when it comes to DACA recipients. Mesa has a very large and significant and important immigrant population. We are relatively close to the southern border, and many of the migrants currently being processed there are being moved to the Mesa-Phoenix region. Yesterday, through the U.S. Conference of Mayors, we had a meeting of border mayors from Texas and New Mexico and Arizona and California to discuss what we can do as mayors to assist with all of the nonprofits and faith-based groups in our communities that are currently being asked to play a critical role in the current border surge. So these are very real issues to local government and to mayors. One of the issues that I have felt strongest about is the need to provide legal status and a quick path to citizenship for dreamers. The Conference of Mayors strongly supports the Dream and Promise Act, a letter that was co-signed by 151 bipartisan mayors urging the House to adopt it. And we're so glad that yesterday they did. We urge the Senate now to act quickly on it so that they can be signed into law and provide secure status to the young people who have known no other country besides ours, many of whom provide essential services and have been on the front lines of the COVID pandemic and who are integral parts of our communities. It's an important first step in bringing real and meaningful reform to our immigration system. It's now my pleasure to introduce Washington State Representative Sharon Tamiko Santos, who is representing the National Conference of State Legislatures.
Thank you very much, Mayor Giles. Good morning. My name is Sharon Tamiko Santos. I represent the state of Washington in the House of Representatives, where I've served for the past 23 years, and I am a former co-chair of the NCSL Task Force on Immigration in the States. Through my association with our task force, I've had the opportunity to visit our southern border on multiple occasions. I think it's very interesting, sort of the setup that we've observed with fence building that it ends very abruptly at a certain point on the 1,933 miles that exist there. I, on the other hand, reside at the northern border, which is about 3,987 miles, certainly almost twice the length of the southern border. There are 13 states, like Washington, who are sitting on the northern border as opposed to the 4 states that border the South. And yet the focus is always on the South. Yet the policies that are adopted and considered in Congress often concentrate on the perceived problems of the South. I'll also note that Washington has very porous borders with a significant coastline and multiple islands, which makes border management somewhat difficult. We have 13 drivable border crossings, and the 4 most used border crossings help accommodate 32,000 cars daily. And they often have waits of up to 4 hours. This is not only for the purpose of trade and commerce, but obviously also for tourism and just ordinary business across the border. I make that point because we have in our state a small community called Port Roberts. It's a beautiful community and I invite you to come visit anytime. But it is one of 4 points in the United States that cannot be reached by land because it's not connected to the so-called lower 48. It joins Elm Point and Angle Inlet, Minnesota, as well as Alberth, Vermont, as one of these small places where the only way sometimes that you can visit your nearest Washington State community is to cross a border. We're also a very trade dependent state. And so obviously we have a very trade dependent economy as a gateway to the Asia Pacific for not only the goods and produce that originates here in Washington State, but frankly comes from all over the United States, trying to gain access to markets in China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, and beyond. Immigrants play an important part in our economic vitality. We have about 1.1 million immigrants in our state, and about 275,000 of them are, that's an estimate, of course, are considered undocumented. They paid more than $15 billion in taxes to the state in the previous year. And they represent close to 20% of our civilian workforce, primarily in two sectors. One I want to highlight first is the agricultural sector. Many of you have probably enjoyed a great Washington apple, perhaps some of our famous cherries or raspberries, where we are #1 in production. Immigrants represent 60% of our agricultural workforce. And those products that I just identified, those are not the types of products that can be machine harvested. They must be handpicked. They also represent about 75% in other types of production. I would note that our agricultural industry represents a $10 billion industry in Washington state. Mayor Elorza commented earlier on the entrepreneurial spirit of many of our immigrants. That's certainly true in my state as well. We have about 75,000 entrepreneurs in the state of Washington, but their total employment as a result of their business is 3 times the number of entrepreneurs. So we have about 230,000 individuals that are owned by immigrant-owned firms. Indeed, in the tech sector, where we have a heavy dependence, no doubt you might recognize these small town businesses called Microsoft or Amazon. They represent about 30% of the STEM workers in Washington, but 54% of all software developers, as well as 40% of all physical sciences. Lastly, I want to note that about a third, about 20% of our physicians are international medical graduates, as well as 16% of our nurses. That's a very important point for me to share, because perhaps you may know that 1/3 of all COVID deaths among nurses are of Filipino Americans. We have in our state had to address many of the outfall of the lack of action at the federal level up until yesterday. And the challenge to us is especially acute during these COVID times, where the state has had to step in and backfill for the needs of our families who are not eligible for COVID relief. NCSL has been reporting on all of the efforts of state immigration laws and resolutions since 2005. Our most recent report was released this last week that helps to showcase all of the efforts to help immigrant families who have been left out, both from the federal COVID and economic stimulus laws, and ongoing issues such as healthcare to seniors and tenant protections, as well as being able to help facilitate occupational licenses for foreign trained professionals like our medical professionals. With that, I look forward to the question and answer period, and I would like to turn this over now to Trustee Sharmeen Shahjahan.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sharmeen Shahjahan, trustee or city council member at the Village of Hanover Park, which is right outside of Chicago, Illinois. I'm also the vice chair of National League of Cities Human Development Committee, where this immigration reform conversation resides. In the last 3 years, I've worked to update and draft it to be more comprehensive. In Hanover Park, we have 1/3 of our residents are foreign-born, but what I'm trying to say is our households are mixed, US-born and foreign-born, including myself. I came to the United States as a child, and it took me 12 years to be naturalized, which is considered quick when you compare it to Mexican or Indian applicants who wait more than 2 decades in line before they can even begin the process. Our cumbersome process for naturalization and crisis level backlog is the core issue that needs to be addressed through backlog elimination funding, as it had done in 2006. Recent significant budget cuts and diversion to enforcement activities at USCIS mean those waiting in line are now waiting in limbo. Many could not get married, change jobs, or reunite with their families indefinitely, like my mom's sister who died while she was waiting for decades. Yesterday's announcement regarding the pathway to citizenship, while it's good to hear that there is a way to come out of the shadows, it gives a false sense of hope for naturalization, given that certain countries have a backlog that goes back potentially 50 years. Eliminating the backlog reduces children aging out of the system. It addresses people overstaying their visas and makes legal immigration actually viable. The case for an efficient and updated US citizenship process is it allows immigrants to settle and contribute to our city's economies. While immigrants' collective spending power in 2018 was $1.2 trillion, 44% of that went back home to the home countries of those to support the families. That's $529 billion that were not invested back into our cities as a result of our restrictive immigration laws. Backlog of application prevents immigrant integration into civic life, and it leads to poor city planning. For example, in Hanover Park, due to limited outreach to immigrants, they could not advocate for multi-generational housing stock, leading to overcrowding, and our schools cannot anticipate student enrollment, leading to last-minute scramble to find teachers or increase class sizes. Our business owners often need language support, and its limited availability was very evident during the COVID-19 pandemic when they were not able to access the PPP loans when it was initially released. 1/3 of the Chicago business owners in the Chicago metropolitan area are immigrants, and this impacted our economic vitality significantly. As a city official, integrating our immigrant residents to fully participate in civic life will not only provide economic benefit, but actually create stability and a sense of safety and community among all of us. This includes setting a clearly outlined set of policies and practices to establish trust in our police, access to healthcare, schools, government institutions, and social services. Please address the 5 million application backlog that is growing exponentially and its deleterious impact on the instability of our residents and our communities. Thank you. And I'll hand it back to our mayor.
Thank you, Councilwoman, and thank you to all of the speakers and all of the partners in this work. So I have a few questions that I want to ask of folks, and I will direct them towards particular individuals. If anyone would like to chime in, please feel free to chime in. But I'd like to get through each of the questions, so we'll share the time in working through them. And in particular, I wanted to come back to you, Trustee Tamiko Santos, and ask you if you could speak a little bit more about the role that immigrants play in your community and the economy.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. As I said, immigrants are a vital part of our economy, largely because of our positioning. We are a gateway to Asia. So from production and harvesting, we are very, very dependent on a migrant workforce. We also, as you know, are well known, I think, as being a significant competitor in the high-tech region where we are continually creating and innovating in this sector. I shared with you some of the data points around the number of software engineers who are immigrants. And I think that one of the things that I learned recently is that the number of this was the agricultural, I beg your pardon. The number of H-2A workers that we requested last year was nearly 30,000. Just to produce your apples and pears, your hops for your favorite beer, the grapes for your favorite wine. We are entirely dependent on the rises and falls in attitudes towards immigrants that are part of what motivates Congress. And I just want to underscore what an economic impact it has on our states and therefore to our country.
Thank you so much. And I refer to you as Trustee Tamiko Sanchez. That's Representative Tamiko Sanchez. Sorry about that. And also, I know that Bill focused his comments on this as well. So Commissioner, can you speak on this specifically about the role that the immigrant community plays with respect to entrepreneurship and the economy in your perspective?
Certainly, and we're actually seeing a growth in entrepreneurship in our area from immigrant businesses, which is a good thing. One of the things that I will stress is that in Charlotte County, the leading economic driver in the county is actually construction, and the second leading is tourism. So both of those industries highly refer to and need the growing effects of immigrant labor. We don't have enough workers right now. I know everybody's probably heard about supply chain issues, but when you have the supplies, it's hard to get the workers to keep projects moving forward, which affects our economy in a negative way by increasing costs to the consumer. The thing that, and I want to kind of bring up a point that I kind of butted heads with some folks in the labor union sector who felt like immigrants came to this country and drove down wages. And I have to stress that they do not do that in my area at all. They outperform and they therefore get paid better than our US citizens do in many, many cases. I see it every day. And I would say that if there was a way for me to have an access point and to be a sponsor, I had the financial ability to build some housing for them, I would put them in housing and bring them here, because that would make my business that much more successful. But again, in our community, we're starting to see a growth in entrepreneurship, and we look forward to it expanding even further.
Yeah, that's interesting, Commissioner. You take the approach that in order for your community, for your local economy to remain competitive, it's not running away from the competition, it's leaning into the competition, and that makes you much more competitive regionally and I imagine nationally and internationally. I want to shift gears now to talking about the resettlement of refugees. And Mayor Giles, I know that your community has had a great deal of experience with this. Can you talk about your community's experience with refugee resettlement and how refugees have become a part of your community?
Yes, thank you, Jorge. I think, as I indicated in my opening statement, a couple of years ago, we were experiencing another surge at the border, and so much so that it exceeded the capacity, of the federal government to process individuals and to have an orderly integration into the community for them to proceed with their immigration proceedings. And so they relied on local government and on NGOs and on the faith community. And literally we had, busload after busload of individuals that were brought to churches, and those, in some cases, not well off Spanish speaking congregations, were asked to really bear a huge burden. And a couple of weeks ago, I had a meeting with ICE, and they said, "Hey, get ready. That's where we're going back to now." So local governments, local NGOs, the faith community, we are going to be called upon again in a very significant way to respond to the border crisis that is a direct response to our failed immigration policy. So we do need to, as government officials, we need to advocate for reform of our immigration system so that we can fix the problem and rather than deal with the symptoms. But in the meantime, Jorge, people like you and me and everyone on this call, we're going to be called upon to do our best, to deal with the crisis that we're experiencing at the border. So I don't think I'm telling people on this call anything that they don't already know and that they're not already wrestling with. But I think it just, again, points to the fact that we need to make sure we get the funding that we need to address the immediate concerns, and we need to get the policy changes to address the long-term concerns.
Yeah, and I think that Mayor Giles, from what I've heard you today and other times speak on this, it's a major lift for you and your community to galvanize, support, and to leverage all the resources that you have to be able to respond to this challenge. And certainly the need for the need for resources to respond to it is one. But as you mentioned, at some point we really need to go to the source of the issue rather than just work on the symptoms. So thank you for that. I want to go to Charmaine now. And Charmaine, you spoke so compellingly about the need to pass federal immigration reform. Can you talk to us more about what you see as the ideal relationship between federal immigration and state and local authorities, and within that, why, in your words, once again, is it so important to pass bipartisan, comprehensive immigration reform?
Thank you. So when we talk about federal and local and state, a lot of times we focus on the policing aspect of it when there's other areas to think about, the workforce development, for example, the job retraining. I'll reference the police one briefly. One thing that I've seen in our community, as I had mentioned, even though we're 1/3 actually immigrants, our community is actually is much more over 50 to 70% that are households of immigrants, and so having clearly defined set of rules and policies in terms of understanding the interaction between our federal authorities and our local authorities is very important in terms of building that trust within our immigrant community. And what we've seen within the Village of Hanover Park, for example, is the hesitancy by our police chief to make that stance, because right now the stance is that we will stand by with our federal authorities. However, in practice, we didn't have to do so in the last 5 years. So it creates a lot of confusion, and it also it does not allow for our residents to feel safe in terms of trusting our government. And what that does is it reduces the civic engagement. It reduces our ability to understand what they need and how we can plan for the future. And so going back to what you mentioned about why we need federal immigration reform completely, as Mayor Giles had said, the 2 bills that were passed yesterday, that's more addressing the symptoms rather than actually looking at the core. Right now, even though I believe we have 40 million immigrants that are not naturalized, 11 million are undocumented and 5 million are just waiting in the backlog. And so all of that is to say that the reason that a lot of people are undocumented is because there is no way for them to be documented. So we need to look at why that's the case instead of trying to fix, the back end of it.
Thank you, Thank you, Councilwoman. And it is 11:40. And before I open it up for any questions from folks in the chat, any of our panelists have one last point that you would like to make with respect to this conversation before I open it up for more questions?
I actually wouldn't mind making one point, Mr. Mayor, and that is one of the things that I think we all need, pardon me, to consider as in our roles as elected officials representing our constituencies is the interaction not only between policies, but those policies that are based on racial bias and on xenophobia and how those intersect. And one of the things that I would just call up as just recognizing all of the lines and how one leads and breeds to the other is I worry that so often people of color in particular have been brought to this country for economic reasons and yet have not been really welcomed for their for who they are and what they bring to the richness of our country. And that xenophobic sort of trend then leads to situations like what we saw in Atlanta over the weekend. It also leads to constant otherness. And I just wanted to raise this as not particularly policy oriented, but it is part of the narrative when we don't recognize that we as a country, in order to form a more perfect union, are able to embrace all of us and not separate us from one another.
That's great. Thank you, Representative. Councilwoman, did you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you. Just one last thing I want to mention is that there is a decline in the US population growth, and it is supplemented by our immigrant community who contribute to the economic growth and prosperity of our country. So in order for our country to be in a global position, a global superpower, we need to think about bringing more immigrants in a way that is, you know, supporting our economic growth.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that point, Councilwoman. And I'm very interested and very curious to get your thoughts on, to get all of your thoughts on. You know, we know that there are a number of people in this country that have strong anti-immigrant views. What do you see as some of the most effective and compelling ways to counter that sentiment and demonstrate the value that immigrants have brought and bring to our country and to our communities?
I could go if no one else. Okay. One thing I've seen within my own municipality is that there's a lack of understanding of what the immigration process is. There's a lack of understanding of the significant amount of background processing that happens, the screening, before someone is admitted into the country. So just the education in terms of the fact that, you know, you can't just become a citizen over the next 3 months or 6 months. There is this very lengthy, cumbersome process that is not tenable for a lot of people. I think that's something that, you know, a lot of people just don't understand at the end of the day, that kind of what it boils down to.
Commissioner Truex.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I couldn't agree more with what you just said. That's kind of where I was going to go. And just want to reiterate the support for that very issue.
You know, I've also seen research that suggests that something called the Immigrant Paradox that suggests that immigrants and first-generation citizens or first-generation immigrants, they fare better in terms of education and economic outcomes than second and third generation. And it's a bit counterintuitive, right? You would think that the more established you are here in the United States, the better you speak the language, the better you're going to do. But you know, this research is just so interesting because, you know, the point that they make is that, you know, there's something particular about that immigrant generation. You know, something about them is what, you know, had them make the decision to leave home, take the risk, plunge into this deep unknown, knowing there are going to be challenges, knowing that, you know, there are hurdles, but yet you still do it. Something about a can-do attitude, this immigrant spirit. And, you know, the closer the connection of successive generations to that immigrant generation, the better they're going to do in terms of education and economic outcomes. And so taking a very practical approach, we know that there are a number of people who are here, and they're here under uncertain immigration status or undocumented. And I would think that it behooves all of us to integrate them as much as possible, as early as possible, so that, you know, they can continue to, you know, excel both academically and in terms of the economy. So to all of the panelists, if there was one thing you could do to fix the broken system, what should it be? Where would you begin?
Jorge, let me jump in on that. I think one of the strengths that we bring to this issue as local elected officials is that in many cases, we are elected in nonpartisan elections. That's certainly the case, you know, in my city for city government. Now, I know there's also very highly partisan legislatures, and that's not uniform, but for the most part, I think we can speak with more of a nonpartisan approach to this. That one of the biggest hurdles, you know, immigration reform has always experienced is always immediately becomes a partisan issue, and we don't really get to a fair debate of the issues, and because it's either a choice between amnesty or walls, right? I mean, it's just, it immediately, we run to our corners and we don't try to find out what the middle ground is and what we can do to resolve things. So I would just encourage, you know, the folks that are engaged at local government levels, the folks that are on this call, we're going to need to really step up and provide leadership for our national leaders in this situation. We do have a once in a generation opportunity here with the proposals coming from President Biden for meaningful, comprehensive immigration reform. You know, that's been the third rail in politics for, you know, decades now, and no one's been willing to take it on. But I think we're going to have that debate in Washington, and so that's a wonderful opportunity for those of us who want to rise above partisanship to try to exert some influence.
I'd like to sort of jump on Mayor Giles's comments, especially representing the legislatures, which are always partisan. And I will say that on behalf of NCSL, like the Conference of Mayors, our task force is bipartisan. We have co-chairs, one being a Republican, one being a Democrat. And I will say that when I was the co-chair, and as long as I have been on the committee, which has been since its formation, I don't know, maybe 11 years ago, I think the issue really is the partnership that Mayor Elorza and Mayor Giles are also exemplifying, which is when you can focus on what is the problem you're trying to solve, whether it's an economic problem or whether it's an issue around you know, the support of the undocumented families who are left bereft when one of their main breadwinners is detained and is no longer able to support the family in the state. That family becomes the responsibility of the state in almost all of its forms. And I think we as state legislators share that sense of responsibility to the individual citizens. I guess one of the things that I really wanted to speak to on that issue of bipartisanship is I will recall when my state first took up the issue of DACA students who are raised in our communities, raised side by side with our sons and daughters and granddaughters and grandsons, and who find at the end of their elementary and secondary education that some of those kids stop right there because they cannot enter into institutions of higher education without a Social Security number. And without a Social Security number, they cannot get the financial aid support. And one of the most adamant champions of the DREAM Act in Washington State was a cherry farmer or an orchardist in Washington who recognized that those children were the same children that came to his house over the weekends to play with his children and his grandchildren. And I think that's what I mean by not othering. We have to recognize that our own fortunes are tied to whether or not we can support one another in a sense of community. And I've seen it at the state level. I've seen it in our national network of state legislators. I've even seen it in Congress, where the members of Congress have taken very sticky issues and managed to break out of the partisan mindset and get to problem solving. And I think we can do that. And the first order of business, back to the mayor's question, really is to reduce the backlog. First of all, let's stop making more of our residents undocumented because of our inaction.
That's a great point. Thank you, Representative. Commissioner Truex, did you want to jump in on this as well?
Well, yeah, one of the things that I think is very important is that we focus on the facts, and that when we have discussions about this, we don't intermingle the conversation. What do I mean by that? I look at immigration and I look at a wall as two separate things. So, you know, immigration reform has been long needed. We all know that. And if somebody wants to bring up whether or not we have a wall or not, I defer that to a different committee, actually, which is Homeland Security. Our focus is on immigration reform and legal immigration reform, and doing a lot of things that have been discussed here. You know, I've got articles from magazines and newspapers where I've been quoted. I'm a Republican, and I don't follow all those ideologies. My ideology is my family came here from someplace else as well. And I welcome these folks in a lot of ways. But one of the things that we're so short-sighted on is the fact that they are a major driver of our economic success. And that's been noted. If we don't identify with that, and you know, the conversation a few years ago is we have to send that back 11 or 12 million or whatever the number is. And I laugh at people that bring that up. And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but that is an absolute collapse of our overall economic ability. And so we need to focus on facts. We need to not throw rhetoric into it, and we need to work together. And the only reason I brought up that I'm a Republican is because I'm one of the few Republicans that wants to fight in a manner that makes sense to me, and it's data driven, and it's not ideological. So I think it's extremely important that we continue to work together. We continue to find ways that we can bring folks to the fold, because the majority of the people I find live in the middle 2/3 of the world, right? The middle 2/3 from left to right, that's where we are. And we can find more areas of agreement than disagreement if we start ticking off those areas and work together to make a successful difference.
Amen to that. You know, one of the challenges we have is that, you know, it seems as though all local politics has been nationalized. You know, you could be running for dog catcher and folks want to know, are you anti-immigrant, pro-immigrant? Are you pro-life, pro-choice? And, you know, one of the challenges of working at the local level is that regardless of where the solution or where the causes lie, you know, the challenges manifest themselves in our cities, in our communities, and at the local level. And so, you know, we have to act. And at that practical level, I think you're 100% right. You know, people are just looking for solutions and are willing to put, you know, the deep ideology behind and just focus on what works. So we have a question here before we wrap up, and then I'm going to open up to all of the panelists, and then we'll close out. So this comes from a Washington correspondent for the Minnesota Post. My question: while Minnesota has one of our country's northern borders, we also have many agricultural workers on our farms that come to our state from Mexico and Central America. What will the new immigration farm workers bill mean for these workers, and does it do enough?
Well, maybe I can just venture a comment with the caveat that my information about what's in the bill comes from the headlines. So with that caveat, I would just say that I know that one of the members of Congress from Washington State, someone I served with in the Washington State House, Congressman Dan Newhouse, was a sponsor. He happens to be a farmer as well. And one of the issues is by providing a sense of surety about being able to come and work legally. I think that for one, brings some relief to the workers. I think the other piece is it also brings relief to the farmers, by the way. But finally, I think it is a way to ensure that by having a legal stream of workers, you can depress the potential for bad actors to exploit workers. And that is something that is also very true. And so good farmers want good workers, and they want them legally. And so I think that's a big win. I couldn't speak more than that.
But you make a great point, Representative. You know, if we're concerned about the depression of wages and the impact that it has on non-immigrant workers, you know, nothing depresses wages more than employers that are taking advantage of immigrant workers, and so making sure that they're not part of the underground economy, but actually part of the mainstream economy, is not just the right thing to do from sort of the humanitarian standpoint, but it's the right thing to do if we're concerned about the impact it has on other workers. All right, so we are just at about time. I will ask either Commissioner Truex, Mayor Giles, Representative Santos, or Councilwoman Shahjahan, any final comments before we wrap up?
Mr. Mayor, I would just like to say thank you again to everybody on the panel. I hope we get another opportunity to do this and to find avenues to work together to help those folks in Washington come to a positive resolution on this issue. Again, and I preach this at the county levels all the time, we have to be the adults in the room. Local government needs to bring that. State government needs to bring that. But we have to be the ones in Washington that bring common sense and a proper approach to this issue, and throw out the emotion and the rhetoric and focus on the results that we need to produce for the benefit of all of us in this country and those that are seeking a better life.
Jorge, I'll just say amen to what Bill and others have just said. But and again, on this topic, we annually have these types of discussions, and we issue a call to action. But it's kind of it's not overly sincere, right? Because but I'm excited that we actually, this is on the agenda right now for Congress and the President of the United States. So we do need a call to action. People do need to realize, wait a minute, that people are actually in a position now to make something happen on this. So that I find that very exciting and very encouraging. So I just hope that we all will be serious this time about a call to action and expressing our support in a nonpartisan, bipartisan, local government way for this, to support this opportunity to see something happen.
Yes, I would like to just add my word of thanks as well. But to really point out, as I say, the National Conference of State Legislatures, NCSL, has been doing this work for some time, and I know that the locals have as well. But I'm a little bit pressed to recall the last time all of us, our organizations, joined forces together, the National League of Cities, the National Association of Counties, and the U.S. Conference of Mayors. This is important. This gathering is important. And I also would agree with Commissioner Truex that we need to have more gatherings of our joint efforts in the future to not only plead with Congress, but to demonstrate our solidarity in support of comprehensive immigration reform.
And if I could just add to that, if you don't mind.
Let's just go to Councilwoman Shahjahan and you'll get the last word.
Thank you so much. I wanted to also share my sincerest thank you for including me in this platform. As an immigrant who came at the age of 7 years old, I had never imagined to be in this space with all of you. So I really appreciate the opportunity to not just share my experience, but also my understanding of going through that process itself. It hasn't been, we haven't really had comprehensive immigration reform since 1991, and it's completely out of whack right now. It's just not functioning. So I appreciate all of us coming together, and I really hope we can do that again soon. Thank you.
Commissioner?
I just wanted to add, I'm also working with the National Association of Home Builders on this issue, and I'm trying to make sure that we continue to be at the same table. I think it's important that we get the focus behind the workforce needs, and so bringing other organizations in as we move forward, I think can be very strong and very supporting of the change that we all feel needs to take place.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And to all the congressional staffers, I think that what you heard from all of our colleagues is that we are all very willing to share our perspective and to be thought partners with you. But we also want to be partners with you on the political angle to this. I know that politics is at play, and that we have to get all the votes to pass this through both the House and the Senate. And so we're willing to work along with you. We're willing to work with our networks of folks and galvanize the kind of political support that we collectively have to build up throughout the country, so that we can get these over the finish line. So please count on us. Let us know how, when, where we can be helpful, and we will be there. So thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate sharing the panel with everyone here today, and I look forward to doing this work together with you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.